maybe more accurate information about Syria. I'm going to be mostly behind here because, in the past, when I didn't have a setup, I just talked, and that's fine, but I think people might be really interested in seeing photos, not just from Aleppo, but from more places in Syria, and seeing the parallels between areas that were inhabited by these militant or terrorist factions prior to and after the areas being secured or liberated. Just a little bit of background. Rick mentioned that I was a music major and that I kind of fell into this. In some ways, I think that's a good thing that I didn't enter into solidarity with Palestine or Syria with any preconceived notions. I simply went to the places and saw for myself and did a lot of reading as well. So I'm presenting this to you not as an expert, but as somebody who spent considerable time, 3 years in Gaza and 6 visits to Syria, several months collectively, and 4 visits to Aleppo. And in Syria, I've been, aside from Aleppo, I've been to Homs a few times. I've been to Ma'aloula twice, if you're aware of Ma'aloula, the ancient Christian village that was occupied for 8 months by al-Nusra and other terrorists, including FSA. I've been to Masyaf, Suwaida, obviously Damascus, where else? Yarmouk, Latakia, Tartus, Jableh, around the country. I have not been to Deir ez-Zor. I would have liked to have gone there, but it's virtually impossible to get there. And I haven't been to eastern Aleppo or Jober or Ghouta or areas occupied by terrorists for 2 main reasons. 1, I value my head, and 2, I don't feel the need to validate these terrorists. They are terrorists, they're mercenaries. Yes, there are people within Syria who have a desire for political change, and those people I have spoken with. They're called the internal opposition. But the people that are holding arms and slaughtering civilians, whether they're Syrians or whether they're foreigners from over 100 countries, I don't need to interview. So I'm going to say that straight up because that does come up in Q&A. On the other hand, I have been very interested to hear what Syrians have said, what kind of changes they wanted. Most of the changes they wanted that I've heard, and maybe other people can tell me differently, have been addressing the issues of corruption in the government. But there's corruption in every government, we have to say that. And this is not for me to speak on because I'm not a Syrian. But they haven't been, when I've traveled around Syria, they haven't been saying we want Assad gone. And this is not going to be a lecture about Assad, but I'm going to make this point. Overwhelmingly, there has been massive support for him. And overwhelmingly, people realize that this is not about Assad. This is about their sovereignty, this is about their safety, it's about restoring security, and they recognize that this is a foreign war against their country. I know there are dissenting views, but they are, in my opinion, the minority. So I want to begin by addressing something you may not have seen in Aleppo.
We should have some light.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. So now, I'm going to be showing a lot of my own photos and videos, but because, although I was in Aleppo very recently, I left on, I think it was November 17th or so. I was there last time for 1 week, and I'll get into what I saw there. But since that time, a lot has transpired, and I'm sure most of you are aware, depending on what news source you're watching, depending on whether it's deemed real news or fake news, and that also depends on who's deeming. You might have heard that Aleppo was almost completely freed of the militants or terrorists that occupied it for years. And again, depending on what source you were watching, you may or may not have seen scenes like this. Yeah, firing in the air is a common thing in the Middle East. I wasn't that.
النجاح الوطني لسيادة الرئيس ويحيى سوريا الأسد.
Thank God for the Syrian army.
من العالم بتطيبوا واحرقوا وترجع تطيبوا لوالده الله يرحمه. الأرضية الطيبة طاهرة موجودة عند والده كمان.
Anyway, these scenes are available not just online on Rupli, which is Russia Today, but also by Syrian reporters on the ground and also by colleagues on the ground. And with that note, before getting into my own stuff, I want to share the words of two people I know. Jan Oberg is from Sweden, and he was on the ground with colleague Vanessa Bealey in eastern Aleppo. And so, oh, there's no way to do it without sharing my notes. It's not fun. Well, okay, so he basically said, I'm gonna have to share this with you then. He basically said, the Syrian Arab Army soldiers participate in humanitarian work in Jibrin Reception Center, Aleppo, that receives people from eastern Aleppo. All day, all I talked with today expressed their joy over the freedom from the 4-year siege and for the assistance of the government, army, and also university student volunteers. Blah, blah, blah. 90 to 100,000 people who have been evacuated from eastern areas of Aleppo. I was free to talk and photograph anyone I chose without security, police, or any other protection, etc. And these are some of the images that he was taking in eastern Aleppo. You can see people lined up for food in shelters and actually being served by members of the Syrian army. Now, they're not being served deluxe food, and I think one newspaper described falafels as gruel, but I mean, that's, you know, Syria's at war and it's doing its best to provide food for the people who have just come out of areas occupied by terrorists. Vanessa Bealey, also on the ground, I'll just play a little bit of her clip, also showing people being, you know, fed and given care. So it's not ideal circumstances, but bearing in mind that this has happened all of a sudden, like in the last week and a half, these areas have been liberated. And we're talking about areas that comprise, as I said, up to 100,000 people. So they're being housed, some of them have been able to go to their relatives, others are being housed in shelters like Vanessa and John were showing. And others are being treated by the Syrian medical clinics and also by the Russian clinics, field hospitals. And Vanessa happened to be at one of them and took photos like this. So I show these things because you aren't probably seeing these on corporate media. And instead, what we're hearing in corporate media is that the Syrian army is gunning down people, that the Russians are continuing to attack eastern Aleppo. But bear in mind, the last time I saw a quote, I'm not sure because I've been traveling, but it was at least 98% liberated. And there was something like, again, the exact specifics don't quote me, but something like 2 square miles with terrorist factions inside who are set to be taken from Aleppo to Idlib in a deal that would allow also people from the villages of Fu and Kafraya in Idlib to be evacuated for medical care. So bearing in mind that the evacuation from Fu and Kafraya did not happen because the terrorists did not allow them to leave, again, and this has happened before, and these people have been besieged since March 2015. On the other hand, in this area of 2 square miles, the United Nations expects us to believe there are 150,000 people. Because for years they've been saying 250,000 people in eastern Aleppo. 100,000 have been evacuated, even for generous and say maybe 110, 120,000. Still, 130,000 people left in that remaining pocket. It's not credible. So this is one of many lies the United Nations has put forth on Syria. One of many ways they've obfuscated on the heinous acts of the terrorist factions, and they've also diverted attention away from the actual bravery of the Syrian army and the volunteers. It's not just the Syrian army, it's their regional allies, also Hezbollah, also the Russians, and also regional people from the areas who volunteer. They're called National Defense Forces, or sometimes they have other local names, but the fact is they volunteered because they want to provide security and do their part for Syria. Now, all that said, those are based on about recent developments, and I'm sure this will come up in question and answer. But I wanted to give you a taste of what I was seeing when I went to Syria. And with that, I want to play just a short clip. Though I'll play it, I think I'm going to play it off of my Facebook account just because it's shorter and edited. Oh, let's see if it's this one. That's Dr. Nabil Antaki. He's a gastroenterologist. He's one of 4,160 registered doctors in Aleppo, although perhaps you'd only heard of last doctors in the media. There are actually many doctors active, but the thing is, when the media refers to Aleppo, they were only referring to these areas occupied by terrorist factions. And we don't, in fact, know how many doctors there were or were not. But the words of Dr. Nabil, I'm going to let you listen to them, because he talks about the suffering of Syrians since the terrorists occupied their areas in around mid-2012. And, you know, since I have this footage, it's better that you hear it from him than me.
My name is Nabil Antaki. I'm a physician from Aleppo, which is the second city of Syria. The war started in Syria in March 2011.
Sorry about the wind.
When the rebels invaded some neighborhoods of Aleppo, and since July 2012, Aleppo is divided into portion. 25% of Aleppo is under the control of the armed groups of the terrorists, and 75% of Aleppo is under the control of the Syrian state. And since July 2012, the main portion of Aleppo received every day orders and bombs and gas canister sent by the rebels on the civilian living in Aleppo. And every day we have many deaths and many wounded persons. In addition, because the rebels control the main roads around Aleppo,